In our previous class, we had done a small comparison between the mother's story written in 1906 called The Sapphire Tale, and Sri Aurobindo's own first version or the first draft of Savitri, written around 1898-99 when he was in Baroda. And what we were looking into was not only just the similarities between the story or the stories, but how mother's and Sri Aurobindo's consciousness was identified even long before they met each other at Pondicherry. I had given you this example or this comparison because that's what she says in Savitri, that the whole of Savitri is an autobiography of both Sri Aurobindo and the mother. So I was trying to go back in time and see the oneness of their consciousness. And apart from other steps in their yoga, which are exemplified in the prayers and meditations and the record of yoga, I thought it was an interesting thing to see the similarities in their first stories, the Sapphire Tale and Savitri. Well, that was not, of course, I read out a few passages from Savitri, book 6, giving ourselves a greater picture of the personalities of Savitri and Satyavan. So today I would like to take you more toward the subject we have chosen, that is looking into the aspect of yoga in Savitri. And most of you must have read what the mother had revealed to Mona Sarkar, that is one of the most magnificent revelations of the truth of Savitri revealed by the mother, from where I will quote a para or two before I take up the subject itself. This is to give us the background of Savitri as a study of integral yoga, or as I quoted to you the mother's own comments, that Savitri is the day-to-day yoga of the author, a complete system of integral yoga for those who want to practice it. It is the yoga of the earth and it is the yoga of the avatar. So we are concentrating on a complete system of yoga, and the mother tells us, told Mona Sarkar, Savitri is the whole yoga of transformation. And this yoga now comes for the first time in the earth consciousness. Savitri alone is sufficient to make you climb to the highest peaks. If truly one knows how to meditate on Savitri, one will receive all the help one needs. For him who wishes to follow this path, it's a concrete help, as though the Lord Himself were taking you by the hand and leading you to the destined goal. And then, every question, however personal it may be, has its answer here. Every difficulty finds its solution herein. Indeed, there is everything that is necessary for doing the yoga. It may then be said that Savitri is a revelation, is a meditation, is a quest of the infinite, the eternal. If it is read with this aspiration for immortality, the reading itself will serve as a guide to immortality. To read Savitri is indeed to practice yoga, spiritual concentration. One can find there all that is needed to realize the divine. Each step of yoga is noted here, including the secret of all other yogas. Surely, if one sincerely follows what is revealed here in each line, one will reach finally this transformation of the supramental yoga. Is truly the infallible guide who never abandons you. Its support is always there for him who wants to follow the path. Each verse of Savitri is like a revealed mantra, which surpasses all that man possessed by way of knowledge. And I repeat this, the words are expressed and arranged in such a way that the sonority of the rhythm leads you to the origin of sound, which is Om. And the last line I would like to take up from this book, this is Harmonies of Light by Mona Sarkar. This is on page 32. You know, it is charged, fully charged with consciousness, as if Savitri were a being, a real guide. I tell you, whoever wanting to practice yoga tries sincerely and feels the necessity for it will be able to climb with the help of Savitri to the highest rung of the ladder of yoga, will be able to find the secret that Savitri represents, and this without the help of a guru. And he will be able to practice it anywhere. For him, Savitri alone will be the guide. For all that he needs, he will find in Savitri. Indeed, Savitri is something concrete, living. It is all replete, packed with consciousness. It is the supreme knowledge above all human philosophies and religions. It is the spiritual path. It is yoga, tapasya, sadhana, everything in its single body. Savitri has an extraordinary power. It gives out vibrations for him who can receive them, the true vibrations of each stage of consciousness. It is incomparable. It is truth in its plenitude, the truth Sri Aurobindo brought down on the earth. My child, one must try to find the secret that Savitri represents. The prophetic message Sri Aurobindo reveals there for us. This is the work before you. It's hard, but it's worth the trouble. This the mother said on 5th of November 1967. Well, I have just taken out the important parts which were focusing on Savitri as the yoga, as the system of yoga. Well, I won't take it up because I know you have already read this many a time before. But then I would like to now connect this complete system of yoga to our own book. Savitri. If we have this volume 29, I don't know the exact page, but there is a letter from Aurobindo written in 1946. It is a very important letter because he gives here in summary Ashwapati's yoga. And as we have said before, yes, there is mainly the vertical yoga of Ashwapati and the horizontal yoga of Savitri. So these are the two major descriptions. Now, what is Ashwapati's yoga? By 1954 edition, that's mine, it is page 882. Ashwapati's yoga falls into three parts. First, he is achieving his own spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual. And this is described as the yoga of the king. So, the one that we are going to take up, Book 1, Canto 3. Next, he makes the ascent as a typical representative of the race to win the possibility of discovery and possession of all the planes of consciousness, and this is described in the second book, but this too is as yet only an individual victory. Finally, he aspires no longer for himself but for all, for a universal realization and new creation that is described in the book of the Divine Mother. So you see, we have basically three aspects: the individual, a representative of the human race, and one who has this universal consciousness. So we are going to take up actually Book 1, Canto 4 and 5, or 3, 4 and 5. Then of course the second one, which is Book 2, which has quite many cantos. I don't think I am going to take up all of them, but maybe give you a few talks on that, because I know some of you have read through this canto or this book in other classes, but my aim is to bring out the yoga aspect, so I'll touch upon it a little bit. And then of course we will take up Book 3, Cantos 1 to 4, the last version, and then we'll go on to Savitri. But what's interesting is that these three aspects of Ashwapati's yoga are described also in his Letters on Yoga, volume 22, SABCL, on page 100 and 101. I think this is one of the clearest letters and one of the most important letters to tell us What exactly is the difference between integral yoga and other yogas? In fact, those of you who are interested ought to read this entire section called Integral Yoga and Other Paths. And it's a very beautiful section because especially in India we have so many other yogas, the Shankara, the Buddha, the Nirvana and all that. So people in those times must have asked him several questions, and fortunately they did so, because today it becomes very clear for all of us what exactly is the difference between the Gita and between integral yoga, between Shankara, between Ramanuja, between all other traditional yogas. But here is one letter on page 100. Which I suppose is the quintessence, the best letter, because he himself puts it point 1, 2, 3, so very clear. But somebody must have asked him what's new about integral yoga. So he writes here, it is new as compared with the old yogas. Number 1, because it aims not at a departure out of world and life into heaven and nirvana, but at a change of life and existence, not as something subordinate or incidental, but as a distinct and central object. If there is a descent in other yogas, yet it is only an incident on the way or resulting from the ascent. The ascent is the real thing. Here, the ascent is the first step, but it is a means for the descent. It is the descent of the new consciousness attained by the ascent that is a stamp and seal of the sadhana. Even the Tantra and Vaishnavism end in the release from life. Here the object is the divine fulfillment of life. So the first a departure from the old yogas, he says it is not a departure out of the world, but a change of life and existence. So the very first thing, it demarcates all other yogas up until now, even the yoga of the Gita, which is supposedly an integral yoga, an integral approach. Even there, the end is the aim of all of their yoga also falls into some kind of escapism from this world, where Sri Krishna himself says the world is sorrowful, anityam, asukham, is transient and sorrowful. So what do you do with this transient and sorrowful world? Escape from it. So that was the solution given even by the Gita. So leave alone the other yogas of Shankara and Buddha, which are very obviously escapist in their nature. So Sri Aurobindo says, the first difference of my yoga is there is not a departure out of the world and life into heaven and nirvana, but at a change of life and existence. If there is a descent in other yogas, yet it is only an incident on the way. The ascent is the real thing. So every yoga, maybe apart from the Vedas and the Upanishads, which talk of an integral life or an integral living upon earth, all other yogas have concentrated on the ascent. Ascent in the sense of the realization of the divine consciousness, or what we say the Brahmic consciousness. Well, as a realization of the Brahmic consciousness, there may be some kind of a change in your outer life, which is more incidental in nature and not as an aim. That means you may become a kind of a sattvic personality. You may be having a great empathy for human beings and nature. You may have a wideness of consciousness. But these are more or less the side effects, if I can say, of that ascent and union with the Brahmic consciousness. But these changes are not really the aim of old yogas. Whereas here, in Aurobindo he says, here the ascent is a first step, but it's a means for the descent. So right from the beginning, he is not telling us to go and realize the Brahman or the psychic being or the divine for the sake of realizing that Brahmic consciousness which is so full of peace and joy and ananda that you forget this word. In fact, this we must remember, because this makes the central theme of Savitri itself. The Savitri too and Ashwapati too, they have ascended in their consciousness, no doubt about it. But both of them with this view and with this vision and aspiration to bring down the divine. Ashwapati realizes the Supreme Mother, that is not the finale, the end of his journey. He is very conscious, of course. He has had to face many tests on the way, many attractions. That why do you want to go back to earth? In fact, there is a beautiful poem also called Life Heavens by Sri Aurobindo, which is his own personal experience, and there we see the heavenly spaces are so peaceful, full of beauty, full of joy, no suffering, no pain, that for a moment he forgets himself, because that place is so beautiful. But then the earth cries out and saying, "Hey, what are you doing there? You have forgotten us. You have to come back." This is exactly what happens to Savitri also. She has this great bliss and heaven, and then she wants to really be in that level. Then the voice of the earth brings her back. So every time we see the same theme, the ascent for the sake of the descent. Experientially, one may get stuck for a while on a certain level, but if there is this original intention of bringing down the descent, one goes through. So that is the first step. Here is the ascent is the first step. It is the descent of the new consciousness attained by the ascent that is the stamp and seal of the sadhana. So, in one word, the first difference is, in integral yoga, ascent is a means for descent. In old yogas, the ascent is the aim, the finale of their efforts. There is no descent at all. Second, because the object sought after is not an individual achievement of divine realization for the sake of the individual, but something to be gained for the earth consciousness here, a cosmic, not solely a supracosmic achievement. The thing to be gained also is the bringing in of a power of consciousness, the supramental, not yet organized or active directly in earth nature, even in the spiritual life, but yet to be organized and made directly active. Of course, when he says not yet organized, this was written long back, or mid-40s sometime. So the Superman had not yet come down. So he says it's not yet come down there in his letter also. But what is the second difference? It is not an individual effort. It is not an individual achievement or divine realization, but something to be gained for the earth consciousness. So the second attempt, which is again unknown in the old yogas, is that the effort here is more for the collective, the human race, and not for one's individual salvation or liberation or mukti, whatever it is called. So, and then as a part of this collective transformation or collective yoga, there is the need of the bringing down of the different planes of consciousness. And as it puts it here, not only a supracosmic achievement, there must be a gain for the earth consciousness. So here we see the individual achievement is the first ascent, but then that has to be done for the sake of the collective. And in the process, what you gain is the supramental consciousness. That's number 2. Number 3, because a method has been preconized for achieving this purpose, which is as total and integral as the aim set before it, viz., the total and integral change of the consciousness and nature, taking up old methods, but only as a part action and present aid to others that are distinctive. I have not found this method as a whole or anything like it professed or realized in the old yogas. So the third one is very clear. It has a method which is total and integral in its aim. That is the integral yoga. So we have the individual achievement, the collective achievement, and a path for that individual ascent and descent. And that path is called the integral yoga. Total and integral change of consciousness and nature, taking up old methods but only as a part action and present aid to others that are distinctive. So this integral yoga also is taking up certain elements from the old yogas, just as kind of a starter, like we said, the synthesis of yoga, where it takes up the bhakti yoga and the karma yoga and the jnana yoga. But in integral yoga, bhakti yoga is not the aim. Karma yoga or the jnana yoga are not the aim, but they are the starting points. So it's telling us that he takes up as we can take up for a starting point something of the other yogas. So taking up old yogas but only as a part action. I have not found this method or anything like it professed or realized in the old yogas. If I had, I should not have wasted my time in hewing out a road, and in 30 years of search and inner creation, when I could have hastened home safely to my goal in an easy canter over paths already blazed out, laid down, perfectly mapped, macadamized, made secure and public. Our yoga is not a retreating of old walks, but a spiritual adventure. So this is a little personal note, but you can understand that why in the third thing, that he is giving us an integral yoga which is necessary for the supramentalization. And then he says this supramental yoga or this integral yoga, he says it's not for himself that he has given, it's for the sake of mankind. He says left to himself, he could have gone on long before to the Brahmic consciousness, to the supramental consciousness, and stayed there. But he wanted to bring it down for the sake of mankind. And that's what he says, it has taken him almost 30 years and he has not wasted his time. In 30 years of search and inner creation, when I could have hastened home means to the supramental, to the divine consciousness, safely to my goal in an easy canter over paths already blazed out. Blazed out because in India we have all these paths which have been well laid, the Vedic, the Upanishadic, the Gita, the Shankara, the Buddhist, all well laid out, blazed out, laid down, perfectly mapped, macadamized, made secure and public. But then he says, I did not choose all that because he wanted to really bring the new yoga for the sake of mankind. Our yoga is not a retreating of old walks, but a spiritual adventure. Because many people have argued this, That's what's new about Sri Aurobindo. He has the bhakti, he has the jnana, he has the karma, he has this, you have to work, offer your work to the divine, which Krishna himself had told us long back, that remember me and act. That is one of the last advices, it tells Krishna, Arjuna, is remember me and act. And the same words you find in the mother, remember me and offer, almost the same words. So what's big about it? What's new about it? So the new thing which we see here is the question of the transformation. Now, keeping these three levels, now if you come back to the 3 steps of Ashwapati, you see a tremendous similarity. The first one, Sri Aurobindo writes, that first is achieving his own spiritual self-fulfillment as the individual. And Sri Aurobindo tells us here that first step is the ascent. It's not yet the descent, but the ascent is required even in yoga, in integral yoga. And so does Ashwapati. That he as an individual realizes his self, what we call the psychic being. Because one thing is for sure, that without realizing your individual self, first and foremost, you cannot realize the universal self. So each one of us is asked to be the true individual first, what we call in yoga, this psychicization or the realization of our psychic being. So whatever else we want to do, first be your true individual. And this is something that we have seen Sri Aurobindo and the mother applied to all of the levels of philosophy. I mean, even in Auroville, it's the same principle, that we are multiple nationalities, multiple cultures, multiple races. But the first thing is that each one of us must realize one's own nation's soul, that is the mantra of the international zone. It's not that we forget ourselves and try to become Aurovillian. You cannot become a universal, a Unitarian consciousness before realizing your own true self. So that means you have to know your cultural roots, you have to know the nation soul of your culture, you have to know the civilization of your culture. That is on the social side. On the spiritual side, you need to know your soul and the psychic being. And then as a second part, he says, you become a typical representative of the race. Ashwapati is asked to be or become the representative, where he wins the possibility of discovering and possessing of all the planes of consciousness. So those are the heights, the levels, the world that he traverses. And even in this letter he says the same thing, that it is not for his own sake, but for the sake of gaining for the earth consciousness. So the objectives of yoga given in this letter and given in Ashwapati's yoga are absolutely one and the same. And the third level where Ashwapati we see, finally he aspires no longer for himself, but for all a universal realization and new creation. So that is on the level of the supramental consciousness. So in this short, brief letter, we have the 3 most important principles of integral yoga: psychicization, spiritualization, and supramentalization. So that's why I hold this letter on Ashwapati of great importance, as well as the same letter which comes in this volume of Letters on Yoga gives you the same thing. So what I want to draw your attention to is to show that Ashwapati's yoga has followed exactly the same principles that are laid in integral yoga practiced by Sri Aurobindo himself. So thereby and therefore we see the oneness between Ashwapati's yoga and Sri Aurobindo's yoga, that there is no difference between the two. Now, having shown that, now let me take up the first aspect, and I said we will take up the first aspect of the individual fulfillment in book 3, Book 1, Canto 3. Well, if you have the book now, you can open that, because we are going to take up line by line the study of this, because this is the first canto where, which really brings out the very first aspect of Ashwapati's yoga, that means realizing one's own soul, the individual self. It's only later in next canto that he'll become the universal, the next book even, the whole thing. So the first canto we have the title, The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release. Now it's very interesting to see the title itself, The Yoga of the King. Now, who is this king? Well, all of us know the name is Ashwapati. But why isn't it giving the name Ashwapati directly? You could have said Yoga of Ashwapati. But here, Ashwapati is not just a king per se. He is something more. He is kind of the king of the yogas, the one who has mastered all the yogas. So he is that archetypal yogin who is now going to do his tapasya, who has prepared himself for the great event. So it's such a person who is not a commoner. He is a king, of course, by position, but he is also a king in his consciousness, who is now ready to take the great adventure. And the first steps in his adventure, as we have seen, the necessary steps are the yoga of the soul's release. That means the realization of the soul or the psychic being. Now, the very first line, a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. One in the front of the immemorial quest, protagonist of the mysterious play, in which the unknown pursues himself through forms and limits his eternity by the hours, and the blind void struggles to live and see. A thinker and toiler in the ideal's air, brought down to earth's dumb need, her radiant power. His was a spirit that stooped from larger spheres into our province of ephemeral sight, a colonist from immortality. There's a very beautiful description, of this king of Ashwapati. Let me read out a few more sentences which really describe him. A pointing beam on earth's uncertain roads, his birth held up a symbol and a sign. His human self, like a translucent cloak, covered the all-wise who leads the unseeing world. Affiliated to cosmic space and time, and paying here God's debt to earth and man, a greatest sonship was his divine right. Let me go back to the first line. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. You see, a line that begins like this. After reading this Book 1, Canto 2, which was basically about the issue, about Savitri, and we come to know what is the work of Savitri, what is the mission of Savitri. And you see, we have such lines you may not be able to get in Book 1, Canto 2. This is page 17 of SABCL. I don't know if you have that volume. You see, to wrestle with the shadow she had come and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night, whether to bear with ignorance and death or hew the ways of immortality, to win or lose the godlike game for man, was her soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. That was on page 17. So here we see Savitri's mission, her entire work. Why did she come upon earth? And you see, these are magnificent lines. To wrestle with the shadow is of course death. To wrestle with the shadow she had come, and must confront the riddle of man's birth and life's brief struggle in dumb matter's night. You know, this perennial, eternal cycle of birth and rebirth. Those who are born, they die. Is this the eternal law of this creation? So she had come to challenge that. Whether to bear with ignorance and death or hew the ways of immortality. So like all human beings, should we accept ignorance and death and say this is our fate? We are born into this ignorance. Upon this earth there is nothing else but death. Or is there someone who's challenging us, says no, this need not be the end. This need not be the eternal law. It's the present law, no doubt. But can we not hew? You see, the word hew is so interesting. Dig open, cut open a new path to immortality. Because till now our path has been hewn towards death. Everything moves or is led to death. But here is Savitri who says that she has come here to really hew, to dig open, to make a new path towards immortality. To win or lose the godlike game for man was a soul's issue thrown with destiny's dice. And you see there's another page, a few lines going across. That's on page 19 at the bottom of the page. If you can find this. In her own self she found her high recourse. She matched with the iron law her sovereign right. Her single will opposed the cosmic rule. To stay the wheels of doom, this greatness rose. I mean, you see, each of these lines is really describing Savitri, the incarnate. Why did she come upon earth? You see, her single will opposed the cosmic rule of death. But she was born for opposing and to stay, to arrest the eternal wheels of doom, fate, death, suffering. So this wheel goes on, but she said, I will stop that wheel. So this is the way this is why she had come upon earth. And then again the last lines, magnificent lines here. A Godhead stands behind the brute machine. This truth broken in a triumph of fire. A victory was won for God and man. The deity revealed his hidden face. The great world mother now in her arose. A living choice reversed fate's cold dead turn. Affirmed the spirit's tread on circumstance, pressed back the senseless dire revolving wheel, and stopped the mute march of necessity. A flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, empowered to force the door denied and closed, smote from death's visage its dumb absolute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. You see, Canto 2 of Book 1 ends with this magnificent vision, where Savitri is empowered with Mahakali. There's a force that comes down into her, and the supreme flaming warrior from the eternal peaks, empowered to force the door denied and closed. If you remember the experience of the mother in 1956, the door denied and closed, she breaks it open. So did Savitri. She broke down this door of death that was really closed for all humanity. I mean, we could not challenge it, but she, the flaming warrior, does it. So, smote from death's visage its dumb absolute, and burst the bounds of consciousness and time. A new world is open, a new consciousness is open, a new race begins. Now, what I want to tell you is not just read out Canto 2, but I want you to understand from a poetic architectonics. You have read in Canto 2 such a description of Savitri. I mean, Savitri the avatar, Savitri the incarnate, Savitri who has come with his mission. And just when you turn the page, you are in a completely different scenario. You see, suddenly a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. What's the connection between Canto 2 and Canto 3? We don't use the word logical, but because we have already said, Sri Aurobindo himself writes in his letters, the overmind doesn't follow your mental rational logic. So let's not get into the trap of saying what is the logical connection. And yet we thought that we are going to get a description of Savitri's work. And so is the whole beginning of Savitri. It's so very dramatic. We don't have any foreground, any preface, any knowledge of what's happening, and suddenly Sri Aurobindo starts, it was the hour before the gods awake. What happened before that hour? We have no idea. So we see Sri Aurobindo, the great epic writer, he is using epic technology, a technique. So it is not that random that these cantos have been given. There is, normally in any great book we have the beginning, the middle and the end. But here we have the beginning from the middle of the book, from the middle of the event. You see, this is a place, this is the time when Satyavan is about to die. I mean, that is the moment, the great event, the divine event. Satyavan is to die any moment now. And then there is a flashback. The flashback is what happened before that. And so we have only these two, Cantos 1 and Canto 2, to tell us what happens before that moment. So Sri Aurobindo has given us great surprises. He doesn't tell you a story saying once upon a time there was a king, Ashrapati in Madra. He had done the tapasya for 18 years. It's not a narration of a story. It's a dramatic visualization of an epic poem. So we have to see the value of this epic poem, what is architectonics as it's called. So we have a beginning which is surprising here. And then, after the beginning, we see Savitri coming on the great morning, the morning when Satyavan was to die. And then she prepares herself. The great Mahakali comes into her to face the challenge of death. And we are expecting something else to happen. But suddenly, the curtain falls. After Canto 2, we don't see anything else. And then we are taken into a real flashback. And not until book 3, the story reconnects. So we have a huge book 2, about 10,200 or 300 lines, which is half of the book actually, where we don't hear anything about the story. So you see, that's why a lot of people get a little mixed when reading Savitri, get a bit confused, not mixed. That what's happening? Suddenly before the gods awake, then there is Savitri who comes down on the day, the beautiful radiant lady, and then she becomes the goddess Mahakali, and then action stops. So those are the moments of intensity that the poet is creating for us. And then Canto 3 opens again with a mystery. A world's desire compelled her mortal birth. We thought that Savitri was already a grown-up lady, she has come down, she is really a marvelous person. But so we have to now again dig deeper into this question of what is this world, whose desire, and who is her mortal birth? Well, of course, having read Canto 2, we can link up saying, oh, her means must be Savitri, there cannot be anyone else here. Okay, that's given. Then as per the story, we didn't see the word world at all. We saw only Ashwapati, the king who did not have issues, so he says, I'm going to do tapasya for getting a child, and he goes to the divine Savitri and then asks for a boon, and the boon is granted. That's the simple story. But you see, it's a dramatic opening, the world's desire. So immediately we see that it is not an aspiration or a wish fulfillment of a single king or a father saying, hey, I want a child. You see, the elevation, you must see what I'm trying to give you is this dramatic elevation of the human into the demigod. There is a complete elevation of the human into the divine in saying, Savitri's birth is not the result of a single human desire. It's as if the world's desire. Now, if you, of course, I presume that all of you have read through Savitri at least once, and you're attending other classes also, I'm aware of that. But the same thing I'm asking, when did Ashwapati ask for this boon from the Divine Mother? When, after he has traversed all these worlds in between, the world's stair. So that means first he has had the realization of the individual self, then he became a representative of the human race. At that point, he is asking for this boon. So world is literally the world, is not a single Ashwapati, because by now, after traversing through the worlds, he has become an aspirant of this entire human consciousness. He is, as he said in the letters, as we have seen, a representative of the human race. So literally he is carrying the human aspiration to the divine. And therefore he says, a world's desire. Now, a world's desire compelled her mortal birth. Again, the word mortal is a bit, it's a bit astonishing. Why did Aurobindo write just the word compelled her birth? Because birth itself is mortal. You see, there cannot be an immortal birth. But the poet says, compelled her mortal birth. You see, it's very heavily loaded. These are not just words, thrown around in poetry. So this question of mortal is against exactly what we have read before. where Sri Aurobindo says, hew the ways of immortality. So here was Savitri, who had come to hew the ways of immortality, one who wanted to challenge destiny and death, and then yet she comes into a mortal birth. Mortal means that body which is going to die. So now we get to guess the meaning of this word mortal. That she has to come into this word mortal, because there are possibilities that she could have come on different levels of manifestation. You see, she could have been just a subtle physical person, she could have been on the mental level, she could have been on the vital plane. So mortal means she has come onto the physical plane, physical level. And then she has to come on the physical level because she wants to fight death on the physical level, not on the psychological level or a spiritual death. So the word mortal gains a tremendous importance, that she has come into this world of death and her body will die or may die, because that's a process. By the process of death, she will conquer death itself. So that's the whole story. But at the same time, we know she did not die. It was Satyavan who dies. So it's a very strange combination we see here, that she wants to have the experience of death and bring in or conquer experience of death, conquer death, bring in the consciousness of immortality. But as per the story, Savitri never dies in a physical body. Who dies is Satyavan. So this is the strange situation. But we will understand that if we transfer the same story into Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Exactly the same situation. Savitri, the Divine Mother, is there in her body. Ashwapati Satyavan, Sri Aurobindo, who leaves the body. And yet, we had seen later Mother describing the experience of death in 1962. So Savitri remains and she gets the experience of death from Satyavan, because it's a single consciousness. So did the Mother get the experience of death through the body, the death of the body of Sri Aurobindo. Well, again, when I say to the death of the body of Sri Aurobindo, I am reminded there's a knock on my head of what the Mother had told Amal Kiran. If you remember, he had written a letter saying, the mortal remains of Sri Aurobindo. And the letter goes to Mother and she scratches out the word mortal. She says, there's nothing mortal in Sri Aurobindo. So you see, these are all not just sayings, these are the facts, and we have to try to understand, not with our mind, but open up our vision. So here we see that Satyavan, that Savitri comes into this mortal world because she wants to bring in immortality to this mortal world. That's number one. And then this question of desire. Again, we need to ask the question, couldn't Sri Aurobindo use the word aspiration? Because the word desire has got something not very spiritual about it. We immediately say it's a vital thing, not very spiritual and religious, and a word, perhaps it has got a negative association. So I looked into the word desire. Why did Sri Aurobindo use the word desire instead of saying a world's aspiration, which would have been more suitable in this circumstance, that somebody is aspiring for the birth of the Divine Mother? But if you go into the Life Divine, chapter 19, volume 1, Death, Desire and Incapacity. It's a beautiful chapter. Unless we go into Sri Aurobindo, we will not understand Sri Aurobindo. We have to ask him the questions. Death, Desire and Incapacity, chapter 19. If you have time, read that. He takes up desire in that fundamental sense. What sense? Desire is attraction of something or attraction towards something which you do not have. So there is always, he says, and then he traces this aspect of desire or this question of desire even in matter, even in atom. So he would say that even in the atom there is this attraction towards each other. And Aurobindo there gives us two principles. He says this whole material world is built upon two principles of individualization and aggrandizement. So every creature, be it the atom or the man or the animal or the tree or the flower, it wants to retain its individuality. And yet at the same time, there is equally this strong force of unification, of aggrandizement, what you may call the social living. But all this is as innate in man as is his force, as is his tendency to remain individual, the I. So Aurobindo tells us this whole material creation world is created on these two principles of individualization, universalization, individual and the collective. So both are as important. And this attraction and this question of desire is the one that links the individual to the collectivity. It is the individual's desire to grow, to expand, to aggrandize, to unify, to have this world union or whatever you want to call that. So there is this deep desire to aggrandize and yet this opposite desire to be oneself. So that is the meaning of the word desire, which is really so very essential to the growth, to the enhancement of consciousness itself. It is not the vital desire of wanting a pleasure. It is the desire for the return to the Divine Lord, the desire of the evolution, if I can say. So it is in this sense that the word desire needs to be understood. Let us not take it up as just a vital emotion or a vital wish. So now we understand if Aurobindo is using this word in this evolutionary manner. So that means the world is desiring, that means wanting to reunite itself with the Supreme. And it is this grandiose elevation or evolution. So in that sense we say the world's desire compelled her mortal birth. Otherwise it was very intriguing. I could not accept the word desire for long. Because any spiritual literature would always say aspiration, prayer, inspiration, meditation, but not the word desire. But then until I went back and saw, this is the meaning. So now Ashwapati is both an individual and a representative. He has gathered the whole human aspiration, or even I would say right from the level of matter, this desire for unification, and gone to the Supreme Mother. So you see how deep is this single sentence and how dramatic it is. But then I'll end with something more dramatic, because I said, how come this desire? What's the truth of this, and what is its relation to Mother and Sri Aurobindo? Because as I told you right from the beginning, my interest is basically to connect with Mother and Sri Aurobindo's life. For me, Savitri is only they and them and their life, described in a different way. But not just the interest, the raison d'etre I read Savitri is to see them, is to find them. So here is a letter or a conversation again from Monas the Supreme, the book that he brought out called The Supreme. This is from page 68. I read out a passage. Because constantly, as I told you, I do bring in comparison with Mother Aurobindo, Savitri, Satyavan, Ashwapati, etc. And here is one. She says, you understand? Sri Aurobindo is the soul of matter, the aspiration of the whole humanity. He is the light in matter or the spirit incarnated in matter. Sri Aurobindo has separated himself from the Supreme and has plunged in this matter in a body with this load of inconscience and ignorance upon himself to awaken them to the divine life. For this he has invoked the Supreme, their grace, to descend here below on this earth to help in his work. That is why, having heard his call, I have come down here into a matter in a physical body, into this world of pain, suffering and death. And it is in the union of both of us that the world will witness gradually this miracle of a divine life. It is because of him that I have descended. It is this intense aspiration of matter from below that he has sent up, and the grace has responded by a descent. What a blessed hour for the earth! It is an occasion for a tremendous progress, so that the whole universe may blossom in a great elan towards the goal of its existence. With our help, which will be at its disposal and a will to pursue, what could be there that could be impossible to realize? This is the moment, for sure, when they call the hour of God. You see, an exact explanation of the single word, single sentence of Savitri, that having heard his call, I have come. So exactly having heard the aspiration, the desire, the call of Ashwapati, the divine descends. So there is an absolute oneness of the theme. So, and of course here, when the mother herself is telling us that having heard his call, I have come down. Similarly, we have seen portions in our last reading when Satyavan tells Savitri, O luminous, descend upon this earth. So everywhere it's the same imagery, aspiring and the grace responding. Savitri is the grace, the divine love, and the mother is the grace, the divine love. So we have here a beautiful combination. And lastly, remember, this whole of this episode of Savitri is, or not the episode, is the whole writing, the book, the consciousness of Savitri is somewhere a manifestation of Satchidananda himself. A manifestation of Satchidananda, because remember, Sat is Satyavan, the carrier of truth. Chit is consciousness, Chit Tapas is consciousness force. And who is Ashwapati? Is the Lord of the forces, is the Lord of Tapasya. So we have Sat, Chit Tapas in Ashwapati, and Ananda, the divine form of love, is Savitri. So there is a magnificent combination of Sat, Chit and Ananda, Satyavan, Ashwapati and Savitri. So those three forms are, as the mother Aurobindo writes later, they are the ones who are the eternal principles of this creation. He has brought it down in a poetic form, and then he is himself the representative of both Satyavan and Ashwapati, and the mother representative of Savitri. So it is not just a story, it is not just a description. It is creation recreated. I mean, you are getting a kind of a blueprint of the creation. It has been told that Ramayana, the story of Rama, was pre-told long many years back, decades back, centuries back. Ramayana is not a description of Rama as it happened in the past, as it would happen in the future. That is what we are told about Ramayana. And that's what I feel is about Savitri. It's a story of the past, of the present, and what the world would be in the future. So this is the Trikala, this is the triple vision of time. And Aurobindo had this triple vision. So Savitri therefore gets this magnificent image, symbol of creation itself. So those figures are nothing but Sat, Chit and Ananda. And for me, they're simply Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, nothing else. That's why I enjoy it, and every moment I feel it's very sacred. But many have written in many different ways, but I have my own personal view that it is the very body of Satchitananda. Well, we have done only one line, but one line that too I gave it a very concise form, and I wanted to tell you more things, but as I said, the watch is not with me. It goes faster than what I want it to. However, if the occasion comes, we'll discuss about that, because I'm doing at present a book on the life divine. I mean, my volume 4, thanks to Meera Jyoti. So my thought and ideas of life divine are very fresh in my mind. So there's another chapter called the desired soul. So what is the question of this world's desire and the meaning of the desired soul? One could go on, you see. But I know enough is enough for you. I'll have to keep it for next time. So we'll have the concentration before we go.